Thanks so much for coming today. I feel like I need to do something teachery, but I've never been like that kind of teacher that does this like lights or clapping. I'm gonna avoid doing that. I just wanted to thank the folks from IRB for coming over today. I know that everyone's schedule is very busy. And just to introduce everybody, Janine Olive is the IRB director. And these are the people that you guys communicate with. I don't know if you've ever met them in person, but these are who they are. And then Linda Zerby is the newly hired campus IRB coordinator, so we're really thrilled to have you on board because I know that must have been a hard transition time. And then we have Dr. Stacy Williams, who's our current IRB chair, faculty in psychology, correct? Yes. And then Dr. Bill Duncan, who's our vice provost for research today. So the format, and also Teresa Cannon is in the back, and she's the medical IRB coordinator. And for the format today, they're going to start off with about a 20-minute overview PowerPoint. It is interactive with clickers, which is the best practice in teaching. I love that. You guys are doing this. And then, and it's going to be opened up afterward to a conversation, so questions, answers. And I don't think that you guys are so rigid that if a question pops up during it, I think it would be fun. So thank you for your time and coming today.
Thank you so much. We're very glad to be here, and we're going to, as Dr. Nim said, start out with just a brief presentation with some tips that help you, particularly if you're a faculty advisor or working with students on your IRB sessions.
Unfortunately, our little music in the background isn't going, but just kind of hum a tune if you want. Just a little bit.
So we do want to do everything we can to work to see that you have a satisfying experience with the IRB, and we really appreciate Dr. Mims inviting us to talk today. We'd like to have an open dialogue. You guys can give us some suggestions as to how we can do things better, and we're going to provide you some tips in this PowerPoint as to how you can make your submissions smoother. So just to briefly review the stages of a new protocol submission to the IRB. Initially, the person fills it out. If they're the PI, they do the entire first stage. If they're not the PI, then the PI gets a second stage to sign that. Then it comes to the IRB for what's called an IRB pre-review. That's an administrative review of IRB staff, and we're looking for two things. One is the application complete, and two is the application consistent. And it's not unusual at all for this to be projected back to stage one to get some additional information or clarification. And sometimes it goes back and forth between stages 1 and 2 several times. After it clears the pre-review, for students it goes to the faculty advisor for an attestation. For faculty and staff it goes to the department chair for an attestation. And then it comes back to the IRB. The IRB coordinators, Linda for campus studies, would accept it into IRB manager, and you get an email notifying you that it's been accepted. Then it goes to the IRB chair for review, and possibly to one or two other reviewers if it's expedited, or to the whole board if it's a full study. Often the IRB will approve a study pending a few minor changes, and that's called requested changes. And then once you clear that hurdle, then you get the approval letter. So the key is, at any point during that, the form might need to be sent back for some additional information or clarification, and of course that slows down the process. So we wanted to share a few tips today that would maybe help lessen the chance of that happening. So understanding what the IRB needs in the application will impact the time, particularly in the stages of pre-review, and then the stage of IRB review with the chair or reviewers, and then last in the requested changes, because hopefully you have fewer requested changes that need to be made. So today, we're going to talk about things within the framework of the Belmont Report. We have an entire human research protection program at ETSU, and the IRBs are an important part of that. And it is framed on the principles of respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. So today we're going to talk about submitting to the IRB in the framework or context of those principles, because they're the most important ones. First up, respect for persons. So for a person to have autonomy and make a decision about whether or not they would participate in a research study, they need to be provided the information in a way that they can understand it. And then the circumstances of consent need to be structured so that it minimizes the potential for undue influence or coercion. So we did a little audit of student submissions to the campus IRB in the month of October 2016, and 100% of them were sent back from that stage 2 pre-review to stage 1 for consent issues. The mean number of consent issues identified by staff were 14. And the mean number of times they went back and forth was 3. So you can obviously see if we can help here, that this would make a big impact. So it's your turn to be the IRB. This is a real sentence from an informed consent from a recent student submission. So I'll let you take just a minute to read that sentence. So you have clickers. If you enter what grade level you think that consent language was on the previous slide. Most frequent answer being 12th grade. It's actually 18th grade. So one of the requirements in the consent for ethics for persons is that you tell them the purpose of the study, what you're doing. And so our next question is going to get at what level it should be. So in general, what is the recommended grade level for informed consent documents? These will be for the general public. So if you please use your clickers again and enter what you think the answer is. Very good. So the answers were split between 7th grade and 8th grade, and that's exactly right. We usually say 8th grade if for the general public. So very good. So you can see the example. That was a real sentence from informed consent. That was 18th grade. Would need to be reduced down to an 8th grade reading level.
Do you prescribe to any sort of measure of that? You know, like.
That is coming up on the next slide.
Okay.
So we don't require any certain measures, but we have a couple suggested measures to help students or faculty who are drafting their consents to try that and see what the reading level is. And we're aware that some of our template language is higher than it should be, and we're going to work to address that. We reworded our consent template that's for online surveys to get it down to a level, but I think our main consent template in the language about contact for questions and voluntary participation, et cetera, could be brought down just a little bit to make it more comprehensible. All right, so here's another be the IRB. What do you think? You want to read this sentence and just take a minute and think how you could reword it, and if you've got an answer, just shout it out.
Working at night keeps kids off the street.
There you go. That's great. That's exactly it. Working at night keeps kids off the street. So we're going to go over just quickly 5 ways to help you as your faculty advisor, if you're working with your students, help them achieve this principle of respect for persons, and as a nice side benefit, have a smoother IRB process. So 1, help them write the consent in 8th grade language. It's not unusual at all for consents to need to be rewritten because the language is discipline specific or highly technical or just lacks clarity. So a couple tools that we've used, you can use just Microsoft Word to check for readability statistics. Or there's also a platform, readabilityscore.com. You just copy and paste the language in there and click measure readability. And it prints out the statistics. And this is the actual sentence we were looking at. You can see the average grade level is 17.5.
Janine, this is an issue that came up this fall in one of our studies. And it was interesting because at the time I was having some problem with Word on my computer. So I knew that Word used, I believe it's the Fleisch Kincaid readability analysis. So I went online, looked it up, put our consent document into that online version of Fleisch Kincaid readability formula. I came up with a substantially different readability estimate than what y'all had using the Fleisch Kincaid that's in Word. I'm not sure why. The other thing, as you mentioned, if one were to simply do a readability analysis of the entire consent form, including the required language, it's typically at the bottom.
Right.
You can dumb that language down in the earlier part of the consent form as much as you can, but if you did the entire document, it's going to pump it up well beyond 8th grade level. So, I mean, we were able to work that out. I wasn't sure at the time which readability formula y'all might be using, and I think it's a good point to maybe make sure that we're using that same formula, whatever it is. If it's going to be the Fleisch Kincaid formula, that's fine. And again, we would have to make sure that we were using it apparently within whichever one they got in Word, just to make sure that it comes out.
Right, and so we don't have a hard and fast rule that it must be 8th grade language. What we do have is a principle that it needs to be in language that's understandable to the person that's going to be reading it. And typically, for the general public, it should be around 8th grade language. But that's a good point. If there's a discrepancy, then does anybody here have a preference or a suggested tool?
It's interesting, there are a number of different readability formulas that you can use, and when we're having this issue, I tried out several and come up with different ones, different reading levels. So it's not consistent. If you go and look and see how those, what the actual formula is in those readability analyses, generally it depends on like number of words per number of sentences. So that if you chop something up into short sentences, that will lower the readability level, but it varies and can vary significantly from one formula to another. I think most people around here use Word, so if we were to use the Fleisch Kincaid formula on there, at least it would be relatively consistent.
Yes.
So is consideration given if, for example, someone is surveying professional educators? I'd like to think we can go a little past the 8th grade level.
Absolutely, and that's why I said for the general public. So, yes, we had a study just submitted last week of surveying people who graduated with their doctorates, and it was very high level, and we made a comment, this is fine, given your population, just be aware that if you were writing something like this for the general population, you want to lower the grade level to an 8th grade. But yeah, absolutely. So it's just if you're targeting parents in general or adults in general, then you want to stick with an 8th grade level. But if you're targeting a professional population, it's absolutely fine to write it at a higher level, yes.
We don't always run readability on every consent form that comes in. It's just if something strikes us as being a very high level, or there's a study that was about an area with a low graduation rate, and the consent form seemed like a high level, there's a discrepancy there, so we would run it and say, okay, this is the level you got, probably needing something a little bit lower.
I think the most important sections that would need to be sure there's readability is the purpose section, the risk section, the benefit section. Those are the meat of the consent that you want to make sure written in language that would be understandable to the participant who's reading it. And I don't know if you noticed, but the example that we did that was actually an 18th grade level, that was from a study on health literacy. It was intended for an educationally disadvantaged population who are having difficulty understanding medical terms. Yes?
When you look at quantitative readability formulas, though, there's a lot of research about the relevancy of them, given that, for example, To Kill a Mockingbird is a 4th grade reading level using a quantitative, but the content in that is not at a 4th grade reading level. So, I mean, there are ways that you can make this at a low level, but that doesn't mean the content of the consent form is at a low reading level.
I see what you're saying. And I think that the important thing is not a score or a number, but that people get the information they need in a format that they can understand. So I think we probably can come away at least with a general principle that it should be written in a language that's understandable. And maybe we can look further at what's the best way to quantify that or to determine if it's the appropriate readability. So I'll be happy to look at that, and if you could send me some information too, that would be great. Because if there are ways that we can do this better than using a readability score, we certainly want to do that. So thank you. Okay, so number 2 suggestion is help your student write their consent in second person. A lot of times we get consent to say participants will be asked to, or the risk to you as a participant are, and it's more understandable to the person reading it if it's you, or the risk to you are. Third is make sure the consent and the X form match in terms of the procedures and the risk and the benefits. And I think part of this is an error, not an error, but a misleading thing on our template. One of our templates for online surveys has, you may feel better if you've talked about this, and you might have some discomfort because you talked about that. And so sometimes people will fill that in with the risk and benefits, but their X form says there are no risks. So we have a consent that says there's a risk that you might feel discomfort when you talk about this. So those should match, and they should reflect the PI's analysis of what the risks are. Number 4, help your students think through the consent process and then explain it to the IRB. This is a frequent confounder with survey research. We'll get an email and a consent and a survey, but we're not sure exactly how that works. So I think it's really helpful to just even line it out, 1, 2, 3, 1. Email will be sent to potential participants when they click the link. Number 2, it takes them to the consent. If they click I agree at the end of the consent. Number 3, it takes them to the survey. If they click I don't agree, it aborts. So a clear explanation of how the consent works is a really helpful thing to the IRB. And also under respect for persons is the principle that participants have the right to adequate provisions for privacy and for confidentiality. So another clicker question, what does the IRB mean by privacy or confidentiality? Which one is about protecting the data? Correct. Confidentiality is about protecting the data, and privacy is about the person's rights. So considerations under privacy, for example, is what will be the setting when the consent process occurs, what will be the setting when the study procedures occur. The best example I can give, and it is unfortunately a medical example, but when you go to a healthcare provider, And the healthcare provider makes sure that your record, your EHR, is protected. That's protecting your confidentiality. When the healthcare provider steps outside the room and allows you to get undressed and gowned appropriately for the exam, and leaves the room and allows you to get dressed before they talk to you, that's protecting your privacy as a person. So the IRB actually cannot approve a study unless they can say there are adequate provisions for privacy and confidentiality. And so that this is a frequent finding as well that causes delays. That we found in our audit of October 2016 student submissions that there was inadequate or missing completely information about privacy in all of them. So this would help if you have to work with your students to think about the privacy issues and address those. And that's what we suggest is that that you could be helpful to them as a faculty advisor if that information is expressed in their application, so the IRB has the information and can make the determination. And one of the frequent things that we notice is a tendency to confuse anonymity and confidentiality. So anonymity means nobody knows who is in the research, but if it's a face-to-face interview, the researcher does know, even if no identifiers are recorded, so that would be confidential. So that's in a consent, that's kind of important. So you don't want to tell people it's completely anonymous when really you're holding it to confidential levels, but it's not anonymous. So principle number 2 is beneficence. And here the IRB has to make sure that the risk of the study are as low as they can be and the potential benefits are as high as they can be. So in our audit, we found that 89% of student submissions were sent back, and that went back and forth between stages 1 and 2 because of risk-benefit issues. Often not that there was an issue with the risk-benefit ratio, but more that there was inconsistent risk and benefits in various documents. So our suggested ways are help your students think through what the risks are and then how they can be minimized. This quote is from a University of Tennessee Knoxville newsletter from their IRB, and I think it's true that generally for social behavioral risk research, often the only risk is potential loss of confidentiality or privacy. And so if there's identifiable information being recorded, there is a potential for loss of confidentiality almost always. And then second, help them think through the benefits, and it's absolutely okay to say there is no direct benefit if there's not a direct benefit. The IRB weighs 3 things: the risk, the potential benefits, and the importance of the knowledge that might result from the study. So they're weighing all those things, and as long as the risk level is low in the study, it's fine for there not to be a direct benefit. And if there is a potential benefit, the word may should be used instead of the word will, because you can't guarantee that someone would get a benefit from a research study.
Jenny,
Yes.
real quick, going back to risk.
Okay.
And I think it's something that can be misunderstood a lot. And I assume from my previous service on IRB, it's still the same. Risk is made up of 2 things, severity and then probability.
Probability
Yeah,
magnitude,
I mean,
correct, yes.
It's possible that space aliens would come down and look into my data records. The probability is very small. And, you know, the overall amount of risk is a balance between the 2 things. So it's not that we have to anticipate space aliens invading the data records and put that in there. But what are the likely or reasonable risks and probability of those things happening?
I thought it might be helpful if you gave an example of a direct benefit.
So if a study involves an educational intervention, then certainly there could be a possible direct benefit of knowledge, increased knowledge on the part of the participant. If the study involves a survey, it's difficult to say that survey research in all cases would have a direct benefit. There may be no direct benefit to that individual. There may be benefit of learning from it that can be applied, but as far as the individual filling it out, there's probably not in most cases. So yes, so risk is evaluated by IRB as probability times magnitude. One of the hard things is there's not a lot of scientific data, there's not a lot of evidence-based data to drive those assessments, and so it's somewhat of a subjective assessment much of the time. But basically, if there's identifiable information, there is the possibility of a breach. It may be a very low possibility, and in fact, it should be if there are appropriate provisions for confidentiality. So it may be something like, there's a possible risk of confidentiality because we're emailing, for example. However, here's the steps we're taking to minimize that risk. So we have a study currently in preview queue where the PI is going to interview people, and she's going to email them the transcript of the interview so that they can say whether it's accurate or not. And there was no risk identified. Well, email is not secure. It was not proposed to be a encrypted email, so there is a potential risk that email could be, the data that information they gave in the interview could be breached because you're emailing it. So nobody's saying that that's something that would stop the study, just that it's a possible risk, and you would mitigate it by, here's how I'm going to maintain that as confidentially as possible, given the constraints of the email. Or maybe you just say to people in their consent, we're going to send this by email. We'll be careful to make sure we send it to the correct email, but it could possibly be read by someone else. Does that make sense? And I do understand what you're saying, that it's often there's a minimal chance of that risk. Dr. Williams, do you have
Yeah,
anything?
I was just gonna add that I agree with you. You're not gonna sit there at your office and just drum up all the possible risks that could be. I like your word reasonable.
Yeah.
Seems reasonable.
And reasonable is what I think is
On benefits, lots of time we see a lot, the benefit of contributing to knowledge. That knowledge is going to affect a future group, not that direct person. So that's usually when we'll say, does it benefit this person directly? It's okay to say that.
So this is a definition of minimal risk. This is from OHRP, the Office of Human Research Protections. It's basically everyday kind of life. So you were handed a piece of paper that has a scenario written on it. Do I need to turn the lights on? You want to read that scenario? We have one quicker question. Given that brief synopsis, do you think this study is greater than minimal risk? Yes or no? So that evaluation is very consistent with what the IRB said. We just shared this scenario last week at the IRB meeting, and the vast majority of people thought it was more than minimal risk. Yes?
Yes, Justin?
I would like to know, Janine, and I think I'm familiar with this actually, this curriculum that they were doing with these middle school children, I think, right, is supposed to be beneficial and helpful to them.
Yes.
Okay, so then if you're weighing risks and benefits, and there is a data that supports this particular curriculum, is that okay to submit that? I mean, I'm just trying to, I'm trying to
Yeah, absolutely.
throw this out there.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So they could make that argument that this is to really help them, even though that would be them going back and bringing up possibly traumatic issues in their lives.
Absolutely, yes.
I think one of the things that, as I moved into an IRB chair role from a researcher role, is I realized the IRB really isn't intended to stop you from doing the work that you want to do. It's just a matter of helping you think through the risk and benefits, and that it gets reviewed differently. And so more than minimal risk study would be reviewed by the whole board then, rather than just the chair. And so it's just thinking through that process a little bit differently. And for me, I was always thinking, oh, how do I do this so that the IRB will think it's okay, you know, as a researcher? And now it's like, oh, wait, you know, I have much more control over this than I thought. So
Well, I was on the committee for
oh, okay, I wasn't aware. So.
quite a few years.
Okay, well, thank you for your service.
No. But I'm just saying that, yes, we'll go to full review, I see,
Yeah.
with something like this. And then you would bring up maybe other things that would be impacted in this study. Does that make sense? Am I saying it right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what do you think some of the risks of this study were that caused the majority of you to say, yes, it's more than minimal risk?
Well, at least two things.
Okay.
One would be the discussion, the interview, where the traumatic life events are going to be discussed with the child again. And that in particular could increase psychological stress on the child who's participating in the interview and that sort of thing. The other is that the interview is being conducted with a staff member present who may or may not know anything about traumatic events. And so that's revealing information about that child to someone who's not necessarily entitled to that information. So there are at least two things there that we're concerned for the viewer of that study.
Absolutely. And the other is that you might become knowledgeable of an event that was a mandatory reporting event, child abuse, for example, in that situation. That's also a risk. Yeah, great analysis. Anybody else?
I also want to know what kinds of things are put in place for follow-up after you just brought up some triggering events. So what type of counseling services are available? What type of debriefing type things are available for both participants and staff, if staff are involved, which, like Jen said, that just bothers me, but, you know, those types of things.
Yeah, that's a great point, particularly with regard to the staff. This is part of a larger scenario. It's a case study from Harvard. In that case study, they said that the reason a school member would be present is that the school had a policy that children could not be alone with an adult, the non-teacher. So that was their policy. But it does raise some interesting questions given the risk about the research and what that means. Okay, last principle, justice. The people have the right to be selected equitably, fairly. And for this one, we found that 78% of student submissions last month were sent back for additional information regarding recruitment issues. In general, this was clarification needed regarding the inclusion or exclusion criteria, how people would be selected, and how they would be recruited. So last couple slides. These are kind of some assorted tips, additional tips for a painless IRB review. Number one, use the collaborator feature. How many people in here work as faculty advisors? Quite a few. Does everybody know about collaborator feature? No? Okay, so when a new protocol submission is first opened up and it's being filled out, for example, by your student, you can't see it until it comes to the IRB. Until it's sent to you for signature. But if your student clicks collaborator and adds you as a collaborator, then you will get an email that says you've been added to a submission from student X entitled this, and you can see that form, you can edit it, you can make notes, etc. So therefore you can work with your student before they even send it to the IRB the very first time. So it's a great feature, a great tool to help you see your submissions before they come from your students, before they come to the IRB. You can also use it if you're working with an external researcher and you want to work together on a form before it's submitted. You can make that person a collaborator. Number two, have somebody read your application before you submit it, just for clarity. And number three, we are happy to meet with you or students, faculty, staff, anybody to work with you before you submit it. If you have a really complex study, just give us a call. If we need to bring in the IRB chair or Dr. Duncan to discuss the issues, we will. And so we'll be glad to help you. And oftentimes that may save a lot of time if you talk through some of the things that make your study really complex, like if you have vulnerable populations, as an example, and you're doing research in school with kids, those kinds of things, we can help you talk through the parental permission and child assent. Number 4, we got lots of tools on the IRB website that you can use. We have a guidance document on using video or audio. We have a guidance document about research in schools. So please use those tools, and if you've got suggestions, if we can help, and if there are things we should add to that, please let us know. We'd be glad to work on that. And last is being familiar with IRB vocabulary. And I put that one on there because we had a study recently where the submitter kept referring to giving the participants the research purpose statement. And we weren't sure, is that the informed consent or is that something different? So it caused a delay because we sent it back to ask that question. So IRB vocabulary can be confusing, and we know that. So I'm curious what you think is the most confusing word in IRB language. There's one last time. Is it exempt, expedited, waiver, or all the above? All the above. So we completely acknowledge, so exempt really means you have to submit it to the IRB to review your study to determine if it needs IRB review. That is true. You do have to submit an exempt study to the IRB and its review to determine if it's exempt. Expedited, unfortunately, does not mean that. And waiver, there are 2 kinds of waivers. So waiver sometimes means there's no consent at all, and sometimes waiver means you have a consent, but it's verbal, or it's online, where people click a button rather than sign a document. So those are all confusing words, and we'll be glad to help translate those anytime we can do that. Last but not least, this one probably goes without saying, but it's allow enough time for the review. So I figured the next question was, well, how long does it take? So we just did metrics for what's called our performance group. It's the IRB chairs and vice chairs and IRB staff meet together. And so for campus, we looked at both exempt and expedited studies. Those 2 confusing terms there. So exempt studies meet certain limited criteria, typically like an anonymous survey or looking at data and reporting it without identifiers, data that's already been collected for some other purpose. And so those are the 2 most common exempt criteria. And so for our exempt time for the first quarter, the turnaround time from the date and the time it was complete, and that's defined as the faculty advisor or department chair signing it, so that's stage 3 or 4 in that very first slide of the stages of the new protocol submission. Time in the first quarter was 10 days, and the second quarter was 15 days. And then for expedited, our benchmark again is from the time the faculty advisor or department chair signs it until the person gets, the submitter, the PI gets an approval letter. And so the total time for that was around 3 weeks. Now we benchmark against our AHARP, that's our accrediting body, and they collect data from all their members every year. And so we benchmark against that, and for those we were pretty well within the benchmarks. For AHARP, the exempt benchmark is 12 days, and for expedited, it's actually 22 days. And so what I'll say is, that's measuring from time it's made it through pre-review and gotten the determination is complete and been signed off, comes to the IRB to approval. So there's a lot of time, sometimes that precedes that, getting it complete. And so that was why we wanted to show these tips that might help that process and shorten down that process so that your students can get their submissions taken care of in a timely manner. So our best practice is you need to allow a good month for an expedited to get the whole process done. Maybe longer if you're doing external sites and have to get other IRB approvals. Dr. Williams, do you have anything else to add? No? Yes?
Are those days work days or?
Those are calendar days. Calendar days. Okay, that ends our presentation. Thank you all, and then Dr. Duncan and Dr. Williams are going to come join us.
so I have a question. I happen to have friends, colleagues of mine who are at institutions that are AHRF accredited as well. And they do very similar research to what I do. One is at Louisville and one is at Kentucky, which both fall under the accreditation. Most of their research that they do, like mine, working with kids with disabilities in schools, so double at risk, right, are exempt because they are considered so close to what teachers would do in the classroom anyway. And I asked if it was only for academic, and he said no, that it was also for any, working with inappropriate behaviors, things like that. And I asked what does it look like for an exempt, and he said, it's a couple days. So we submit it, we push it through, and within 3 days we'll be done, ready to go, start the study. So my question would be, and for those that did expedited, it would be, a week to 2 weeks tops. So I guess I'm wondering, and for a submission that has no red flags, and your metrics that you just stated, were those ones that were the average for regardless of the issues that came up, or were those ones that were good to go?
Those were a median of all the submissions.
Okay.
Let me just say before you respond to Pam, she and I both talked to colleagues at other universities, and I'd have to echo, certainly not a scientific survey, but I'd have to echo exactly what Pam's just said. A colleague at the University of Washington said most of their educational research is exempt, and it includes academic as well as behavioral interventions. I was a bit surprised at that, but apparently it's not uncommon. And even those that are typically go through expedited review, it takes about 2 weeks. The contrast that we had, we've got several cases, primarily student research, not just student research, including faculty research, that seem to be taking much, much longer. And I think that's an overall issue that we've heard from faculty within the college, that the time from initial submission to approval is taking rather long in many cases. Now, there could be a lot of reasons for that, but it's something that we have heard from other faculty. We've seen more recently for students, much more so, interestingly enough, than in the recent past. And so I think it's raised a number of questions as to why that might be happening. And unfortunately, we have at least one, we may have more than one student who has to do a thesis and was going to do an empirically based thesis, but now, because of time constraints on his graduation, he's a graduate student, he's going to go back and do a systematic empirical review of the literature instead. So that's a student who's not going to get to do a research student because he's been attempting to get his thing since, I believe, July. And again, I understand that there are oftentimes, particularly with student submissions, a number of issues that come up. But I think one of the primary concerns that faculty in the college have right now is the length of time it's taking to get research approved. And these are mostly cases of students that we have cautioned to submit early in order to make sure that they have sufficient time to get their study approved and then collect data, write it up, analyze it, defend it. Because not only do they have to do all that, they have to do it within the due dates of the graduate school. So it's become quite a problem. We need to let you know that because this is the kind of dialogue we need to have and see what we can do to troubleshoot. That's one of the other things that's come up, at least in my discussions with faculty and universities, is that at some point or another, they indicate that there were a time issue and some other things come up with their IRBs, and they have successfully met and worked out those issues on. themselves and for their students. And anybody that wants to chime in, please do so.
And Jim, I was just going to add to that. I think one of the reasons that possibly could be taking a little longer, I know that the student that I had, and maybe a couple of other of our thesis students, when they get the reviews back, each time they get the modifications back, they're reviewed by a different IRB person. And, you know, the first review will come back and they'll fix it, and then the next person will find something completely different, and then send it back, and it'll be either back to that same person or another one. So I don't know, I realize you all are very, very busy. It's always good to have multiple eyes on that for validity, I understand that, but I do think that just adds more time to continuing edits and modifications. And also, I had a second issue. Those of us who do educational research often would like to involve teachers in the studies, and those teachers may not always be participants in the study. It could be that they're just going to, something as simple as reading the child assent form to the student before they, you know, do something. And I realize that you have to have the teacher do city training in order to do that, and they would be considered study staff. But the problem that we have is getting the teachers to actually do that. If we told some of our local teachers that they would have to go through the city training, then that's going to be very, very discouraging, and then we would have to change them over to somehow being a, you know, we were told to make that teacher a participant in order to get maybe like a waiver, but really that kind of changes the whole dynamics of the study, if that makes sense. And Jim, feel free to follow up on that.
Yeah, and I would take have a slightly different take on that. I don't think you can, particularly in social behavioral research, particularly in educational situations, I don't think the world can be neatly divided into participants and their study staff. When we go out and do research within classrooms, we are not typically the interveners ourselves. We're asking other people to do that. While some people may take offense at this, in most cases like that, although there are studies that we do where we're studying directly teacher behavior, the teachers are our instruments. They're our microscopes. They're our centrifuge. They're our rulers. They're not subjects. They're not study staff. If they were study staff, I could say, do this. And I have the power to hire and fire people on the basis of whether or not they perform their duties as required by the study protocol. Teachers are not. We already go out and ask schools and the teachers themselves, here's a study that we want to do. Can you do this? And so in a sense, we are asking them for their consent, but we're asking them to participate in the study, not as participants, but as our instruments. And in some cases, we have to observe their behavior to make sure that that instrument is reliable and valid. So I personally have a lot of problem with, and it seems to be a relatively recent development, of looking at teachers who are implementing the interventions in classrooms, things that might typically go on there anyway, in terms of behavior management and instruction, looking at them as either participants or as study staff. The reasons I just mentioned, the pragmatic reason and in the 30-some years that I've been involved in doing research in classrooms, this is the first time that I have ever been confronted with that question. Are the teachers participants or are they study staff? At this institution or other places. And I don't understand the change in perspective. And I find it a significant problem as far as doing research.
So I want to just say that I am an IRB chair because I believe that IRB should be smoother for researchers. And so I am open to hearing feedback. And I appreciated very much what Janine said along the way, which is that we're open to feedback and we want to make the process better. I tend to agree with you actually that the teachers, and you know, I think the easy answer in that case could be, why doesn't just the researcher do it since that's the researcher and the study staff. But I mean, I would disagree with that because the students trust the teacher and the teacher works with the students already and, you know, whatever. It's kind of a broad statement because I don't know that you're talking about a specific study per se. But, so I tend to agree with you, actually, that the teacher doesn't necessarily become study staff just because they're participating in the process or sending consent forms home or collecting consent forms. So I think that's definitely something that we as an IRB staff need to talk about. And I'm not aware of how other institutions process their submissions. I'm really curious about how it is that they can do that so quickly. Yeah, I'm a researcher too. I would love to have a process move that quickly. And I mean, I'm also curious about the intervention work that gets approved as exempt. I know that there is a category for educational research under the exempt categories, but it's when you're not really testing something novel. It's when you're comparing strategies that have been used in education. So, and you can elaborate.
Yeah, there is an exempt category 1, research on normal educational practices, and comparing different curricula or instructional techniques.
Comparing?
Yeah. There's full exact language. So I'm wondering if that's the category that.
No, it would be like the use of technology to teach writing to students with a moderate intellectual disability and have never had the chance to learn writing skills or something like that. That would be a typical thing that my colleague would submit that would be exempt. And I agree, I was a little surprised. I used to be at UNC Charlotte before this, and most of the work we did, is very similar to what I'm doing now, was expedited, and it would be, we used to handle everyone back then, but it would be like a week for expedited review. So I'd call them up and say, hey, I'm bringing something over, kind of did an umbrella of work that, you know, we fell under, and it just, because it was just so similar to what teachers would be doing in the classroom. I mean, of course we had some novel ideas that would, but again, it was almost like, we know this works for teaching functional skills, but we're gonna apply this to academics. And that's the novel part, you know what I mean? Like that's never been applied in that way, but we know it's a very safe and effective practice to teach this skill.
Yeah.
And
it might be the case that there would be a way to communicate differently between us. I mean, I can't say that would make it that all of your studies are exempt, but maybe there are cases that we're just not totally understanding what you're saying.
Yeah.
So maybe, you know, there's a question on the protocol submission that asks what type of review are you requesting? And sort of the PI request, and then the IRB chair makes the determination of which level of review it needs. So if you thought that it was reasonable to ask for exempt, and you ask for exempt there, you could add a note. You can click add note on the right of the question, right side, and put the, you know, which category does you think it needs, and why, and that would be helpful, I think. Okay. So we brought up category number 1 that we were referencing. Everybody read that? Because category number 2, which is surveys and interviews, expressly prohibits surveys or interviews with minors.
Well, it's interesting, and this is probably specific kinds of cases we can get into. I know you're familiar with a recent submission of students put in where she wants to investigate the effects of 2 different text-to-speech programs. And these are computer apps that she's investigating. They are commonly accepted and used within classrooms. There's very little research data on them, and that's why it was such an important study. And just that we were surprised to find out that it was a study that was being moved over to the medical IRB. And with no real knowledge of that FDA proposed policy about the use of applications, that came as a complete shock. It would seem that it's something up here that is a commonly accepted educational practice, because these are programs that are quite often used. And these days, the more things that are being put into application programs for use on portable devices and that sort of thing, particularly for kids with moderate to significant disabilities, that's going to be more important.
Yeah, and in that case, actually, it was which one led to faster acquisition. We knew they were both going to, because they were commonly used. And I understood there's this new FDA, the push into devicing, and we were working with somebody with autism, which is very common to use these communication devices. But yeah, so it was something that we knew worked. We just, which one led to faster? Because one was free and one wasn't. And that's valuable information to be able to share out to our community. And so I know that was a very unique one.
Yeah.
So can you speak to that one?
Yeah.
I wasn't involved in that process.
So, for the exempt categories, there's 6 of them. 1 through 5 are not allowed under FDA rules. So if it's a study that's subject to FDA rules, it cannot be exempt under categories 1 through 5. So the study that Dr. Fox is referencing used apps for communication, comparing one to the other. And the FDA had issued some guidance, I think a little over a year ago, about when an app meets the definition of a medical device. Now, so there are 3 ways a study can be under FDA rules, and one is if it's a drug, makes sense. 2 is if it's a medical device being used to evaluate safety or effectiveness. And 3, if it's data is being collected to submit to the FDA. So the FDA regulates, cell phones and baby food, et cetera. So if you're collecting data that you're going to give to the FDA about some article they ever see, it would make it FDA. So in this particular study, the question arose is the app or are the apps medical devices? There's a complicated definition of medical device, but part of it refers to a disease or condition. So since it was being used in the context of autism, the chair of the medical IRB thought that it met the qualifications for a medical device. And so the medical IRB has the expertise with medical devices, and that's why the particular study went there. I will say we had a similar study, not kind of a similar setting, but in this particular study, the PI was using video games and biofeedback to see if it reduced stress. And so the same questions arose, is this FDA or not? And the IRB determined that it was, but then afterwards we thought, we're going to email the FDA, we're going to ask them. And so the IRB medical chair did email the FDA, and he just got a response last week, and they basically didn't make a ruling on the video game. It was a video game that was designed to reduce stress, but they did rule on the biofeedback device that was associated with it, that it was in fact a medical device. And they then went and said, but, this is so low risk, we're going to exercise what they call enforcement discretion. So they did acknowledge it was FDA, it was a medical device, but they thought it was low risk, and which meant, we're not going to come after it if you don't follow the FDA rules. But nonetheless, from an IRB perspective, it still made it an FDA study. So one of the things that we could do is send a question up to the FDA that says, okay, what about apps that are used for communication in autism or other conditions like that? What would you say about that? So that we can get an answer from them. And so that would help us with precedent for future studies. Because they gave 3 categories in this guidance of these things are definitely medical apps. So there's one where you can insert this thing into your smartphone, you put your finger on it, it spits out an EKG. Clearly a medical app. Then they gave some that were not medical apps, so using a GPS to find your doctor's office, not a medical app. And then they gave this middle ground, things that involve enforcement discretion. And so that's where they ended up with this biofeedback based on this study. So I think we could certainly do that so that we can get information for future studies. We certainly don't want to make it subject to FDA if it's not, because it's extra rules that the PI has to adhere to. It does mean it goes to the full medical board, etc. But we don't want to miss it if it is an FDA study either. So we'll, yes.
One of the problems we have is the FDA will give you a ruling and it will be very narrow. We've been hoping to get a ruling from now that was a broad one. But if you go for a drug, it's what, 54 days? We got a response back in 22 days. So again, it's a time thing. So here's how we did this with this study that Jenny was talking about. We decided, let's go ahead and get the study started. You know, we required a little bit of planning, and I worked with the PI to get that done. And then we'll go to the FDA. So it didn't hold up the study. And now with the FDA ruling, we can come back. The IRB can make a different ruling, and then we move forward. But we're kind of caught in that. With apps, it's a whole new world. And one of the issues about how you use an app, if you talk about a condition or a disease that's recognized as a medical disease, that's that gray area that we're stuck with. And the reason we have to pay close attention to that, the FDA every 4 years comes in and looks at our agenda and said, pull these studies for us. I want to do that. So we want to protect you, we want to protect the institution, but we also don't want to hold up the studies. So we're feeling a way like a lot of other people are in this arena. So hopefully we'll build some data with FDA and make it work. But again, I think the important thing too is when you have some of these things that are questioned, give us a call and come down, because we have a lot of expertise. And Janine, I've been involved with many regulatory devices for 30 years at the national and international level, and both our chairs are involved. So we'll sit down with you, and especially if it's a complex study, we can help you think through. If you do it this way, your study is going to go much, it's not going to affect the outcome of your study, but from a regulatory standpoint, this is going to move smoothly. And back to the issue of speeding up the things, I think one of the most frustrating things for me and in working with some of the studies that we see is the non-clarity of what's done. It's not fair to the IRB or to the participant if a study is unclear. And so I think that's what I think things would be very much smoother if we can find ways to help the students, put something in that's clear. It can be easily reviewed quickly and come around. And I think that's what we want to work with you on. There was one department we spent a lot of time and effort working in, and some of their submissions now are some of the best ones that we see back. So I think intervention early and working with you and your students, but you have to think about it. The student has never written an IRB study. It's the first time. If I had to write one the first time, it would take me. So a little bit of help from that.
So one of the things we actually tried this several years ago, it's probably been 7 or 8, is we came to College of Ed once a week or something for a couple of office hours, so that we were available here to help students or faculty if they had questions, but we really, the services were not utilized. But if that's something that if we can better provide expertise, we'll be glad to meet with students or faculty on an individual basis, or if we need something a little bit more formal on an occasional basis, we could look at doing that to help give some guidance through some of these issues.
I mean, I love that idea. I've talked to my colleagues at Vanderbilt and Peabody in special education, and I can't imagine the volume of studies that they submit because that's who they are. And they have a person in their department that strictly does that for them. And so I don't, that's impressive. We don't have that manpower to do that, but I think that's a great idea. I just would hate that it wouldn't be utilized.
Like a couple times a semester, that's really well.
Or a once a month thing, because I know you were coming weekly, or I don't know, every 2 weeks or something like that. That would, to me,
Or a time when people could sign up. Like if we knew that for particular days or your days to come, if people wanted to talk to you, sign up, and so you could come over then. And if there was nobody that day, then you wouldn't need to.
I think early intervention works. We know that. So anything we can do to help out.
I think one of the things, or a couple of things that can be done. I know in research courses that I teach, we don't use too much sometimes. I've made it a requirement that students in the research course go through CD training, so they have some contact. It's one thing to go through the training, but I think as far as sitting down and writing up a protocol submission and making sure that it's clear is artful. And sometimes it's very clear to us, it's less clear to you. And, you know, I don't know exactly how to get around that issue. Some of it's in the nature of the research that we typically do. But I think one thing, a couple of things, I don't know that you still do this. At one time, I think there's an IRB newsletter that was online, and that each newsletter addressed some issue, something that was new.
The topic of the week or something?
Yes, say for example, the regulation about apps, or some commonly misunderstood and misperceived aspect of you know, the IRB process, or terms like privacy and confidentiality. So that, I know that one was a big issue for quite some time, having people understand the difference between the two. And so, if not now, then perhaps instituting something like that again, so that people can go and reference it, or an FAQ on your website might help also. I think those are some things that would improve communication. I know there are a couple of faculty who were ran into issues in their research where they were collaborating with investigators at other institutions. And when they both went through city training, they were unfamiliar with how to go about the process of getting approval from the city across a multi-site institution, that they could have this study reviewed at the other institution also, and then that would come to y'all, or the other institution could defer to ETSU. And those are some things that come up, not just the students, but the faculty. And if that were something that, because obviously you're collecting data on some of these things, when you see some trend in those data, you get addressed.
I quite like that idea of newsletter or somehow having communication. I know Linda spent a lot of time updating the website, and it's so user-friendly now, and, you know, I don't know that campus as a whole knows to go there and find definitions and things of that nature, and certainly that could be a way to communicate with students too.
And if there were specific FAQs that you need, like if there was a, you know, send them in to us what you need so we can write something up. Because if we just write what we know, it might not be what you're looking for.
That's true. We do newsletters. It's been a little more sporadic as of late, but if we could have some suggested topics, it'd be helpful if we knew more about doing research in schools and what that means with FERPA or whatever would be, you guys tell us what would be
And I think
helpful.
we would be happy to collaborate with you.
Okay, great.
I like the idea of topics that you think are
Right.
important, but I also think it'd be important to have maybe once a year or twice, once every, at the beginning of the semester, is a meeting with the graduate students, you know, and discuss, you know, these are the kind of issues, you know, here's the resources you have available. I think sometimes graduate students think they have to do it all on their own. They submit it, and then you don't get a chance to see it, and they haven't used the tools that are out there to help them. So I think, you know, volunteering makes it done, but I think in some intervention up front would be a good, and also get a chance to introduce that these are the people who have a question, come and talk to us. Because I think that, I can't emphasize too much, that makes things move much more smoothly. If you come and talk to people ahead of time and get some insight, you know, maybe 15 minutes at a time, let's say 2 weeks or a month.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that. So my own student, graduate student, like she was her first time through the IRB process, and I said, well, take a stab at, you know, filling it out yourself. She said it took her 10 hours to fill out all of the IRB stuff. And I went and looked at it, and I'm not answering these right. So I think it's hard to know what the questions are asking. And so I was thinking about dissertation boot camp.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you do a once a semester meeting or something for graduate school students, consider a WebEx or something, because you have so many students who could not attend face-to-face. And Stacy does come, and Chris Ayers did before, to thesis and dissertation boot camp, and talk to our students about the submission process. That is tremendously helpful.
And I also am gonna say that I tell my students, you know, we talk about different aspects of the application, but I say that when you get to a point and you don't know what they're asking for, call. And they do call, and you all must be nice because they call you a bunch of times. And I find that when my students are getting hung up, it's when they get feedback from you all and they don't make the changes and resubmit it quickly enough. So I'm gonna say that my students have some responsibility for some of that holdup. Janine added me as a collaborator last week, I guess, on one. My student hadn't added me. And so you have the ability to do that with, and that's happened to me before when I had a student who was being particularly obtuse about what the changes were needed. Then IRB has added me as a collaborator on it and even sent me an email and saying, could you help clear this up with your student? And so I appreciate your helping my students. But I do tell them to call, and they do. I know they do.
Well, we just talked about having that as a requirement to put an advisor as a collaborator, and that you can't move forward unless you add that collaborative feature.
And I have to say, I just went through this yesterday. I went over and just on the spur of the moment to talk to Janine about an issue that seemed to come up and we got it resolved. And on a personal basis, going and talking to people, that's great. I've never had a problem with IRB in terms of doing it. I want to return though to something that Tina Hudson brought up earlier, and that is it seems that when we're submitting protocols and review, get feedback, respond to the feedback, send it back in, there are oftentimes different reviewers or additional reviewers that have not looked at it before. And they find something that, or they believe they find something that. As somebody who's served as an editor, editorial board, that kind of thing, I get a manuscript submitted and I send it out to 3 reviewers. And they write back and they say, well, it's pretty good, but we need to see these revisions. So send that back to the author and make the revisions and send it back in. I'm not going to send it to somebody that hasn't reviewed it because of that very thing. We're all human. We know about problems in a rate of agreement. And I think that's one of the issues that, again, we come up with that we've seen across our students and faculty. And in the review process, I'd really rather see, you don't have tons of people to respond to it, but I think sending it out to somebody, second round, sending it out to somebody who hasn't seen it before, that's just going to be a
So I'm a little puzzled by that, except because actually about 2 years ago, at least, we changed to a process where we have staff meetings and do pre-review, so everybody's present, so that we avoid the exact scenario you're talking about, where it gets sent back multiple times from multiple people looking at it. And the only thing I can think that might lead you to think the conclusion they have is that it depends on who's driving as to who puts the notes on the X form. In other words, we're in a staff meeting with all of us present, but whoever happens to have the computer, everybody's looked at it and provided their feedback, and then we try to consolidate that. So if one person noted 2 things with a consent, another person noted 2 other things, somebody's going to make one note combine it for 4 things, and it just depends who has the computer who's doing that. But we actually do have all staff look at submissions to start with to identify any issues. And what I see more frequently is that when it comes back in the second time, then it's going to be more specific to whoever the coordinator was, but she would have been included in that first review. But what I find more often is that responses given and answer to questions then change other things.
Well, and that certainly can happen, yeah.
Yeah, so this is a faculty who couldn't be here. It says one person okays something, the next time makes you change it, and then you end up changing it back to the original way it was. So that was what their experience was, that back and forth. It'd be nice to get some understanding of informed consent, if that was something else.
So we need to specific on that, but what happens is we all are at our desk, we go through, we add our notes, then we go into Janine's office. Lately, that's been happening, it's been done different in the past. So Janine's at the computer looking at our notes. And she'll keep certain notes, combine certain notes, and that's why you'll see several different names the first time around, but we've all sat together and discussed them. Next time it comes in, it might come to me since I'm your coordinator, so you'll start seeing my name instead of Janine's. Or sometimes Janine's with me and we'll talk about it, she's like, well, let me put it out real quick, but we are discussing it together.
I wanted to ask a clarification question, so I think you brought this up. So is it the pre-review stage that this is happening?
It's at
or-
each of the stages.
Okay, so once pre-review happens with the staff and then it goes to the chair.
Different names and different issues at the same time, it was okay. That makes sense. So
Okay. So I'm just thinking about how, it's either me or myself and another reviewer or two of the IRB board, just to involve people in the process. So I was just trying to clarify if it was the IRB board bringing up additional questions, or if it was
it's
during that.
basically like
Just the whole
from
thing.
the pre-review, and then the first couple of times it was sent in, it would have, like the first time, I can't remember the order, but, maybe Yasmin looked at it, and the next time Janine, and then the next time maybe somebody else, and back to Yasmin. And like round 2 modifications, those would be fine, sit back in, and then the second round of fine, something completely new, a different review. So,
I agree, that would be frustrating and it should not happen.
Let me ask about
Rebecca's
I feel like I'm a baby researcher compared to a lot of people in here, but I came from a research one, and students could not submit unless the faculty was PI. You could not submit to IRB unless faculty was PI on it. I don't know, that was just how, well, that's fine. I'm just saying that there are some places that have that in place. I'm not suggesting we do that. I'm just saying there are some places that have that in place. ODU is a research one, but we also had a college committee. So the college committee, because I can't imagine how many things you all have to review. When I'm sitting here hearing you all talk, when you all get together to review everything, that's blowing my mind. Like how much time y'all have, I can't even imagine. And how many you have to review. But we had a college committee that, that was exempt. It went to the college committee and we got it back within days, like 3 or 4 days. And I've been, with colleagues across the U.S., whether it be research on like Virginia Tech or, other places like that where it's very similar that they can get things back within days. But it sounds like you all are reviewing everything, which that sounds like such a massive.
The staff
amount
reviews
of work.
everything during pre-review as a group.
So I don't know if we've ever had anything like a college committee here, or if that's ever been brought up.
It makes
Here, or-
exempt determinations or reviews for scientific merit, or what was the purpose of that college?
So if the research was that you thought it was going to be exempt, it went to the college committee. And the college committee reviewed it and was basically, and granted exempt status, or said, no, you need to go for the full IRB. And it would literally take 3 or 4 days.
So there are no federal rules that say who has to make exempt determinations for non-VA studies. There are rules for VA studies. So there are different ways that different institutions approach it. And that is one way, sometimes department chairs or sometimes a committee or something like that. At ETSU, the choice was that it would come to the IRB chair, doesn't go out to other reviewers, but to the IRB chair for an exempt determinations. I don't know if other options were considered in the past. I think the thought was that that they wanted consistency across campus, but that's certainly something that Dr. Duncan could look into if.
I do know early on, I remember there was an issue with the medical IRB where a faculty member came to the IRB member, when an IRB member, and that member said, "Oh, this doesn't need to come to the IRB," and there was a complaint about the study, and they got picked out. And then I think that's when, looking back at the history, it's all pre me looking back at the history, that's probably when the decision was the determination needed to be at the IRB chair, so they knew the regs and things. But I don't, that's a history prior to when I was here.
I recall some similar things to that.
Yeah, and I think was trying to do consistency. I like one of the things I like about a college committee is just to, not to make a decision, but for clarity. I mean, I cannot make it, how difficult it must be for things coming in, and the student thinks, oh, I'm really clear. Well, it's not really clear. They don't know the regs, they don't know all these things. And so I think it's a learning process for them that hopefully by the time we've gone through one.
It's not just students.
I'm sorry, what?
I don't think it's just students. I think we probably face some of the same issues from faculty.
But you know, like I said, we had one department where there was real difficulties with quality, and the quality there is just like, I read these now, and it's like second to none. It's night and day from prior submission. So intervention, and I think what happened there is that it passes down from one graduate student to another. So this is what you need to do. This is what you think, and that community is if we educate that, it's going to go much more smoothly.
We've also talked about having a student member on the IRB.
Yeah.
We haven't added that student yet, but I think that might be also an opportunity to hear what student experiences are. And so maybe that's something that you all want to have input in. And there's.
Do you all have metrics on how many, I'm sorry, not interrupting. Do you all have metrics on how many studies came out of the College of Education last year that were determined? Because I think if we heard that, we might not want a college committee. Yeah, I would be interested in that.
When I've heard of college departmental committees being formed, I think the main rationale that I heard for it had to do with understanding of concepts, procedures, etc. within that particular district. Because even with the medical and social behavioral IRBs, there's quite a bit of variability over here in terms of the research that's done, the topics, the techniques, and that sort of thing. I guess I'm of two minds about it. Whenever you talk about another committee, that means people have to serve on it. It's another step that you have to go through. It may be something that we could try out and see how it works and make sure that we're not complicating the process even more.
We did just develop an internal research advisory committee, and that could be something that we could discuss in that group to see if we wanted to move forward with our own pre-process to help with. Although I am really encouraged by your willingness to come, whether I don't know if we've decided on a time, but like twice a month or whatever, sign up process as a way to help with some of these issues.
We were hoping that by this point in time, the revision of the common rule would have happened, that would be pushing many of these decisions from the IRB back to you. That may or may not happen. The rules were interesting and complex, and there was a lot of fighting among the community. So I don't think it's going to happen. But we were hoping it would happen because it would simplify some of the process. They put this decision back on you and not the IRB and then the institution separate from the IRB. But we'll keep you apprised of those things and see what happens. I think the good thing about listening to you, when you hear your comments, I like the idea about suggestions of putting up on the website, the sort of problem of the week, with calling it something differently, fact of the week, and then finding a chance to work with your students and with you, and maybe we can come up with some better draft more consents. That seems to be some of the big issues. And clear definitions of what, a better, clearer definition of what risks are, benefits, and not very rarely is there going to be direct benefit to it's benefit to the community as a whole, and so we can help people.
That'd be great. I know there were some concerns from faculty that couldn't be here about getting child assent from like a 4-year-old. What does that look like? Because I think they were trying, and there were some barriers saying, no, this is not right. But then clear direction on, well, what should we say? Because we thought we addressed it, but clearly use as an example.
Draft some of those.
That'd be awesome.
As a general principle, children under age 7, active assent is not usually sought.
That's right.
Because if they dissent, that should be respected.
Yeah.
But 7 is kind of the general.
And I think that's a good example of one of those topics that would be helpful to explore either here or on the website, or wherever. Because it is kind of a gray area as to when you seek assent and when you don't. And it also has to do with cognitive level. You have to be 18 and not have the understanding of being 18 to assent. Let me ask one quick question, because I know we're running quick out of time, because you mentioned process before. Let's say I've got a study that meets the expedited review criteria. I submit it. What happens to it? Who looks at it after I submit it? And where does it go through that process? Now, let me preface it by saying, back in the day, I reviewed every proposal that came before me, along with the coordinator. And we made some decisions about, is this really expedited, or is it need to go further? It then went to what at that time was called a short review or expedited review committee. We looked to see if they could approve it. If they could, yes, it was approved and had to be announced at the next IRB meeting, and they approved it. Is that the same process now? It sounds like it might be a little different.
It is different now. So the first thing that happens, it goes to the pre-review, then it goes to department chair, faculty advisor, and then to the IRB chair. The IRB chair makes the determinations, basically, does this belong here? Is it human subject research? Is sort of what set of rules are we following? Does it have anything to do with FDA, or is it all OHRP? And then the IRB chair makes the decision, is it expedited, is it exempt, is it full? And then the next choice that the IRB chair makes is reviewer assignment. So the IRB chair or vice chair does exempts. For expedited, the chair or vice chair can do them as the sole reviewer, or can serve as a reviewer and send it out to another reviewer, or can send it out to 2 reviewers. Those are the choices. For a full study, which never happens, rarely happens on the campus side, it would go to the entire board. So we did used to have what was called a short review committee, and I was on that short review committee before I came into this position. And when we first went through AHARP, which was in 2005, our reviewer forms got much longer. And AHARP had raised the concern, saying, we don't really know about this committee because they may not have that expertise of a particular study. We think maybe we should spread that out a little bit more. And then as our reviewer forms got more complicated, the short review committee decided for us and said, we're not doing all these. You need to spread it out among the board members. So the IRB chair looks at the study, looks at the area of the study, and identifies an IRB member that has the appropriate expertise. Now, if that study involves children, then the IRB chair is looking for someone who has experience as a child advocate, for example. So expertise in area as well as expertise in population of that study. So that's how it works. And expedited reviewers are given 2 weeks to review their study. And then it comes back. If we've had 2 reviewers and their requested changes, those are compiled to what the reviewers together want and approval pending letters.
So to clarify, are you saying as soon as the protocol came in, you would review it at that point? Okay. So that has changed. I think that's probably the biggest change. It sounds like where now there's.
At American, I used to meet on a pretty regular basis for a fairly long time.
Yeah.
It was on Thursdays, went through them all. And gave them up something about either as exemptions, as short review, or
So there was no pre-review process at that point
sort of
clean it up
Sort of
before.
informed, yeah. I spent a lot of time talking with investigators about issues.
If you want pre-review, you can have
Well, I was probably somewhat naive.
I think we're out of time. I can't say thank you enough. And thanks to Jim, kind of inspired this idea and helped put some common thoughts of our college together. Thank you for your time. And we'll talk more about what we can do to help folks in the college in the future. And I'll make the recording available. And thank you for being willing to record. I know that we needed to say that that anything that could change, we need to make sure we check with IRB because, right, this is status quo right now, but things may change in the future.
Maybe the improv guys.
That's right.
And we also have PowerPoint.
Yes, PowerPoint,
I would
yes.
love to use that PowerPoint.
Yeah, you can
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.